Yeah, so I work for Perth Search. I'm a senior outreach specialist. This is my lovely team. So we do content marketing and SEO. But before I entered the world of digital marketing, I was a journalist for 5 years, and I worked and lived in Dubai and London. And I worked on titles such as Cosmo Middle East, BBC Good Food, and Athlon, which is their version of Hello. And this was before I was made an online showbiz reporter at OK Online. The job was fast-paced and high-pressured. We had to produce 8 articles per day. That was one per hour on the shift. It was stressful, to say the least. And if you think that's bad, Daily Mail writers need to do 10 to 12 on any sector. So, yeah, it's intense. We also had pretty high targets for our stories. I had to do 800,000 views per month to start with, and then this increased to 1.2 million story views. But what this tells us is stories like this will get 130,000 views in a day. So a breaking news story about a celebrity death. It's a little bit more difficult when you've got stories about Love Island stars like rescuing kittens from trees. So this would get about 5,000 views. But our targets show that every story has to have a certain amount of mass appeal. If a story's not likely to get at least a few thousand views and lots of social media engagement, it's just not worth publishing. And I think this is essential for us as digital PRs to keep in mind when we're coming up with campaigns. So from campaign conception to pitching journalists, I'll be talking you through 3 key points of outreach strategy today. So we'll be looking at who to target in the newsroom, and that's more about prospecting. And then I'll move on to how to target journalists, which is email and outreach strategy, and then when to target them. So during my time as a journalist, I received many misguided pitches from PRs. This was for one of 2 reasons. Either they didn't look at my Gorkana profile and they didn't know what sector and beats I wrote about, or they didn't understand what my job title entailed. I was an online showbiz reporter, so logically you'd think any celeb, entertainment, TV stories and campaigns would be great for me. Right? Wrong. I wrote breaking celebrity news stories, so that entailed very little PR involvement. The correct person to pitch these stories to would be like a lifestyle editor, an entertainment editor, or a features editor. We're really time poor, so do as much as you can to sort of help a journalist out when you're sending emails, and I'll get into that a bit later. Prospecting, though, is the most important part. There are 3 methods I use that are pretty fail-safe. The first is using Google News, and I'll search for the campaign topic that I'm planning on outreaching, and I'll click on the most recent articles. That can be like up to 50 if it's getting loads of coverage at the time. I'd recommend seeing who's written the article, and I'd also recommend checking out who's written the 5 most recent pieces in that sector, because they're most likely to be on shift at the time and it's constantly changing. The next thing we do is use BuzzSumo. Again, I'll search for the campaign topic that I'm planning on outreaching, and it then sorts the results by the number of social media engagements and who's written the pieces and the publications covering the topic. Due to the popularity of the piece, this often means they're more likely to write about it again, so they're pretty safe to pitch to. And the final thing we do is we use Gorkana for broader prospecting and mass outreach. And this is for topics like general news, entertainment, tech, and motoring. We use this and it allows us to search by sector, region, whether they're online or print, and for really specific niches as well. This is what the database search homepage looks like, and it's if you haven't used it before. And then what I'll do is I'll go to keyword search, and I'll put in the niche that I'm looking for, click on Gorkana short note and job title, and it will bring up all the journalists that write about this topic. You can download the search results once they're up and use it as CSV, and then you can send your outreach emails and you're good to go. Now I'm going to be talking about how to target journalists. In my opinion, the most important part of an email is the subject line. If you can't get a journalist to open your email, then you've got no chance of getting a link or having your campaign seen. And the other thing I try to keep in mind is whether you can see your subject line as a headline, like whether that's scrolling through news or through Twitter, what would entice you to click on your subject line? Personalisation helps to an extent when you're targeting publications, whether that's broadsheets or tabloids, but obviously this differs, and sometimes we will just be more general. So for example, if I'm sending out an entertainment story to tabloids, I'll use words like shocking and surprising, along with making the tone of my email more dramatic. This is an example of a subject line that I sent to tabloids for an entertainment piece. So from McDonald's to Mean Girls, discover 42 surprising celebrity first jobs. But broadsheets prefer data-led and hard-hitting headlines. So spell out the story in the subject line and at the beginning of the email. This was for a piece we did on speeding offences in the UK, and instantly I outlined that we're giving them freedom of information data, and then I'll go on to explain the results of the campaign within the subject line already. So I've said Avon and Somerset are the worst places in Britain for speeding. When we get this right, we tend to see our subject lines actually used as headlines, whether that's word for word or with some slight variation to match their tone of voice. So news.com used it almost word for word and added a little bit more. The Mirror did the same, and The Independent actually used exactly the same copy for that headline. The next thing we need to think about is if you have everything a journalist needs in your email. This was a campaign we worked on called Speed Offences, and we used freedom of information data to find the best and worst constabularies for speeding offences in the UK, and other metrics such as the most active speed cameras and which constabularies have improved over the years. In my opinion, the essentials for any email is making sure the data is clearly laid out early on in the email, you avoid fluff, you outline all the angles that a journalist can work with from your campaign, and then you make sure you've got your images in email or easily downloadable from an external link, and your campaign link itself. So starting with data, this is an example of the email I sent out to journalists for the Speeding Offences campaign, and instantly within the first line I've put what the results of the campaign are, and I've listed the data in a really easy, digestible format. And then moving on to no fluff. So within this email, I stuck to all the data and stuff from the campaign, and the furthest I diverged from the campaign topic itself was just mentioning why we conducted the campaign and how we thought of the idea. Angles, I made sure that I highlighted multiple angles for them to work with if they didn't like my initial obvious general angle. And finally, the campaign link. We usually just tend to put in a line like this because we were finding that we had to do a lot of reclamation when we didn't spell it out for journalists. But that's not all journalists need help with. This piece in the Express that covered our campaign used the majority of my email body copy as their article. From the subject line, where they just added a few extra words to match their tone of voice, to chunks of my email as their body copy and adding a few lines here and there, and the way I laid out the data as well. But we also found that quotes are really important for padding out online stories too. You can request a quote from the client, but try to make sure this isn't too brand oriented and it's as relevant to the campaign as possible. Alternatively, I've started using the journal request and PR request hashtags a lot on Twitter, which must leave my followers a little bit confused when I'm tweeting about Disney one minute and I'm asking for a sex expert the next. These are some examples of the PR requests I've sent out. So, for example, I was looking for a psychologist to comment on a campaign. I've outlined that we're looking for coverage on UK national publications, and I also encourage people to retweet by saying, if you know someone who can help, let me know. This worked particularly well on an instance where a journalist from the New York Post was interested in publishing the results from a sex surveys we conducted. But he also needed a quote to flesh out the piece and asked for a punchy quote from our sales spokesperson. While our client needed to remain unbiased about the findings, we found that an expert comment could be the answer. So I sent out another PR request, and within 24 hours, a PR had forwarded my questions to their client, who was a therapist, and they turned the response around within about 2-3 hours. This was the coverage on the New York Post, and we also got a link. And you can also see that the quote made up 6 of the 12 lines of the story, so it just shows how much we rely upon these. Finally, you need to make sure you fact and spell checked everything in the email. So that's Googling whatever your names, ages and dates that you've mentioned in there. Even if it wasn't your job as well, make sure you've checked all the data within your campaign, and there's nothing that a journalist can pick holes in, because that could lead to damaging a relationship with the publication as a whole. Now your email's good to go and you're ready to get some links, I'm going to talk you through when the best time to target journalists is. My personal opinion is that there is no best time. It relies on a range of factors. I've heard multiple rumours and ideas and lots of advice given on the best days and hours to pitch, but we work on shifts. So sometimes I'd have been working early, sometimes I'd be working late, and this changes week to week. So unless you know a writer's rota, any time as close to the campaign being launched is fine. But there are times of the year where your pitch might be less successful. For example, days where there's big Brexit announcements for general news campaigns, award ceremonies for if you're doing entertainment or fashion or lifestyle outreach. The same goes for royal weddings and babies and large protests. And obviously, if your client or the campaign topic's getting negative press, avoid and hold all outreach for a little while. And while many of our campaigns are evergreen and not time sensitive, we've also toyed with sending releases out for particular days of the year. This was a campaign we did called ET Tourism. And so we looked at different places around the world where there'd been notable alien sightings and made posters. We sent this out on UFO Day and before UFO Day, but it hasn't worked many of the times that we've tried. Despite our content seemingly being tailored to the event, as niche as a day revolving around UFOs. So don't rely on them and just use them as a bonus for your outreach. And if you do think a campaign has the opportunity to be relevant to like particular days or a TV show launch or something, then you need to remember that preparation is key. And I don't mean a week before. Sometimes we'll have stories in the bank a month in advance. So as a recap of what I've talked about today, journalists are under a lot of pressure, so try and make their lives as easy as possible by making sure you've got everything they need in the email and clearly outlined as well. A good subject line is essential for success and coverage. Present your data clearly. Preparation and thorough prospecting is key, and there's no best time to target journalists. But keep an eye on the news cycle to make sure you don't clash with other major events and big stories. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, feel free to tweet me or email me.
Thank you, Serena. You whizzed through that.
I know.
So, don't want to freak you out or anything, but are you good for some questions?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Perfect.
What's all about?
Hey, Serena. When you're doing the outreach piece to a journo, you're scared me, man. When you're doing an outreach piece to a journo and you've got that email really sort of like compensating it's done, would you hand them the data as well, or from your research, or would you give them like snippets of the research as the
So
headline
if there's
pieces?
like tons of data, so we've had pieces where there's so many other angles that it would just take 2 to 3 pages of an email to get through it. So what we do is we'll initially send the email out, and then if they come back to us and they say, oh, have you got, sometimes they'll come back and they'll be like, have you got any Manchester specific data, or like, have you got anything extra? We'll send that over and we'll put it in a like Google Doc for them, and then they can work through it if they want to. And we can literally see them like, yeah.
So you wouldn't like sort of send it over, you know, full shop. You just be
Not
like, these are
instantly.
the most important parts we want from a story. This is the link back to
Yeah.
the data piece. Right,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
brilliant. Okay, thank
We
you.
withhold a little bit. Hi.
Hiya. When it comes to putting a link in an article in the email, how much kind of say can you have over what link you have in place? So, for example, do you have to use your homepage link, or can you use a dedicated landing page, or is there any rules around that?
Ideally, we try and get like the campaign page link, so we'll put it on a section of their website, and we encourage the journalists to link back to that. Sometimes we've had them linked to just the homepage, and that's fine too. We accept that, but obviously it's ideal if they do take the campaign page. Yeah. And they're usually quite happy to change it. Like if they've put in a link, it's no bother for them to just edit that on their CMS. So yeah.
Thanks.
What's been the piece of work that's either had the largest cultural impact or kind of lasted the longest, and why do you think it resonated so well?
So in terms of like making change, that we did a campaign called Electric Avenues, where we looked at how well different 30 International Energy Agency countries adapted to electric cars. And Australia performed really poorly, and we sent it to news.com. And from that, they wrote multiple articles from the campaign and like calling on their prime ministers for change. There was a bit of outcry on Twitter as well to the prime minister and saying, look at how badly we're doing. So we were just like, oh gosh, okay, this could have a positive impact. So, yeah.
So, from both sides of the sort of fence that you've been on one side and now the other side, what's the hit rate in terms of when you were a journo, how many emails you would get off the likes of people like us hitting your inbox and you go in, no, 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 ooh, no, no, no,
because
yes.
it's my role, like I would get a lot of misguided press releases. So it would be like I could go for a quick lunch break for half an hour, and I'd have 50 emails in my inbox. And that I was only a senior, like I was only an online news reporter, whereas my editor would probably have maybe a few hundred an hour. So yeah, a lot of the time I would just end up deleting. And if I had a bit of time, I'd try and forward it onto the lifestyle desk, which is where their pictures would work. But yeah, many times.
So on the other side then, where you're now outreaching to them, what's the hit rate like?
I could send, it depends, like we try and target our prospecting as much as possible, but so I sent out a TV campaign recently and I sent out about 300 emails. I didn't get any replies, but you know, there were a few links from it. So a lot of the times journalists don't have the time to reply. But it's really hit and miss, like, you know, it just depends on the campaign as well and what's trending in the news cycle at the time.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
How do you handle your follow-ups? Like how?
Right, as an ex-journalist, I'm quite vocal to the team about only doing one follow-up.
Okay.
We've seen your email once, we might have been busy and deleted it by accident. The second time we've definitely seen it. Okay. So I'd say only follow up once, and what I tend to do is I'll be like, hi, I just wanted to follow up on XYZ. Here's some information from my previous email. I'll bullet point the most important bits and include some tables or information from before, and then that's it. But I tend to have a lot of success from follow-ups in comparison to the initial email.
And after you've done that, would you then try and contact someone else, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd either go to a different writer or,
and just not assume that they've spoken to each other.
If I hadn't gone to that beforehand.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Either Brett or Hannah?
Emojis in an email, yeah, on the subject line.
No.
Okay.
No. I
was asking for a friend.
Please tell your friend not to do it. Yeah, I was talking about it recently actually because I've still got some friends who work on online news, and they were like, look at this subject line we just got, and it had like 8 emojis, and they were a bit cringe. And we were just like, why are they doing this? No. Yeah, I don't know, I get a lot of them as well, but instantly I would just be like,
this is terrifying. My God. How many journalists do you email at a given publication? So say you want some coverage in the Guardian Lifestyle. How many Guardian Lifestyle journalists will you email?
I tend to go for 3 max usually, and then if they don't respond or like even read the email, then I'll go to others. But yeah, I don't want to use up all my contacts in the initial outreach because I might think of another great angle later down the line and then be like, okay, well at least I have 4 more people to tap up for that. So.
Oh, so you'd send 3 to the Guardian straight away?
Yeah.
Or pop that up to 3?
Yeah, okay. Up to 3 because we're all like in a newsroom. At OK, there was 4 of us on the desk at a time, and sometimes like the other girls were on a different shift. So if you're hitting someone up who's like on shift at the time and you don't know the other person's not working, you've got much higher chance of success with it, I think.
So Len's question then, do you personalise your emails then, or have you just used generic ones?
To an extent.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, like if I go to a tabloid, I'll make it a lot more I try and like tailor my content to them, so I'll try and write it in the style of their articles, like very to the point, but using tones that they use. Whereas if I was going to The Guardian or something, I wouldn't use words like, this study revealed a shocking 96% of people did X, Y, Z, to that extent. But I won't personalise every single one. And I wouldn't be like, oh, I've read your articles, I love them, so yeah.
Is hitting the general news desk a good idea, or going after the individual
Yeah,
journalists?
definitely. I didn't used to, and then I was speaking to another colleague, and he said he always sends it to the general news desk as well. And it's true, it hits everyone's inbox. Yeah, they might delete it, but someone might be like, oh, I might add that to the news list for the weekend shift or something. So it's definitely worth it.
One more. Do you work on offline relationships, or did you, as a journalist, have people trying to make relationships in bars in London with you? Did they hang out with you? I know, I'm serious because I've been on both sides of this, where people do actually use offline to make relationships to use at a later date.
When I was on print publications, it was much more so. So like when I was writing for a magazine in Dubai, everyone would always be like, can we have a breakfast meeting, can we go for drinks? And that worked really well for print. Online, we don't tend to have as much say, or we don't tend to like have the ability to even like add these stories or like their clients to our coverage. But I know one of my friends works for Lamp Bible, and she's always like, she's become quite friendly with a few PRs, but it's mostly to get free drinks and cool advice rather than being like, yeah, I'll definitely include slugging letters in every article. So
Right.
yeah.
It's kind of important.
It is kind of important. I always start with Twitter, and I'll like try and engage with some of their tweets, or like, you know, just start following them and seeing what they write about and how I can sort of target them better. I haven't asked anyone if they wanted to meet for meetings. I think because we outreach to so many people, it's so difficult to make relationships with all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hiya. Early on in your presentation, you mentioned that you had quite a large increase in the amount of traffic you need to get to an article.
Yeah.
Is that potentially putting a lot of pressure on journalists now to run up pop list articles, maybe where the data isn't there? Hashtag fake news.
It's just getting worse and worse, really.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, that celebrity death story, this is going to go on YouTube. So initially we tweeted that out and had the Twitter card as Home Alone actor dies. So everyone obviously thinks Macaulay Culkin's dead, which is pretty shady to do. And then after 5 minutes we updated it to Home Alone actor dies, and included the actor's name and all that. So yeah. There is a lot more of that, and it will be more like, these are the top 10 rooftop bars to visit in London, rather than, you know, deep thought out pieces. Yeah. Yeah.
What software do you use for your outreach?
We use BuzzStream.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much is Gorkana?
That's all right.
Yeah, how much is Gorkana? Because I can't find the price anywhere.
How much is it?
Yeah, is it like
I don't
thousands?
know, actually.
Yeah, so, I can probably answer that if you want me to.
Thank you.
So it depends. It's
Hold on.
I'm very popular in Wales, which is lovely.
That was great timing. Great timing.
So it's a license base, so it depends on how many licenses you need. I'm not going to lie, like, it is expensive. So we've got licenses. What have we got now? 10 seats. 8 or 10 seats.
Yeah, something like that.
8 or 10 seats, and I think we pay probably close to £5,000 a year for it. There are many cheaper options though. I've heard really good things about Vuelia. I've got a few mates who are using Vuelia, and it's like half the price. I have no affinity to Gorkana at all. It's like they're all kind of the same. Get if you want to get a trial, tell anyone other than Gorkana that you're using Gorkana but you're thinking of switching, and they'll give you a free trial, for sure.
Brilliant.